Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at self-motivation with this source, Unlocking Self-Motivation, an inner force.
Oh, interesting.
And what really caught my eye was how this source kind of turns the whole idea of self-motivation on its head. It's not something you're just born with or you're not.
Yeah.
It really digs into the idea that self-motivation is a skill, which means it can be learned and developed.
Yeah. That's a really cool way to look at it. And that's exactly what this source is saying. It's not about just waiting for that motivation to magically appear.
Right.
It's about understanding how it works and learning how to kind of kickstart it yourself.
Exactly. And it breaks it down into two main parts, the mindset behind self-motivation and then the practical tips to actually make it happen.
Make sense?
So, where do you think we should start?
Well, why don't we begin with the mindset stuff? This source really hammers home the whole power of why concept.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say, hey, I want to do this. You really got to dig deep and connect with the reason behind it.
So, it's more than just like, I want to learn how to code. It's like, why do I want to learn how to code? What am I going to do with this skill?
Exactly. That why is going to be what keeps you going, especially when you hit those bumps in the road.
Right.
Like, think about it. Sometimes working out can feel like a total drag. But if you remind yourself that you're doing it to keep up with your grandkids or to be able to travel the world, suddenly it has a whole new meaning.
I can definitely relate to that. And it makes me think about those times when I've struggled to stay motivated. Maybe I wasn't tapping into my why strongly enough, but how do you actually uncover that deeper motivation?
Well, that's where things get pretty interesting. This source actually suggests a few techniques. One is to try and really imagine yourself achieving the goal and then see what emotions come up. Is it a sense of accomplishment, freedom, maybe a deeper connection with others?
Hmm.
Another technique is to think about your values. Does this goal line up with what's truly important to you?
Okay, those are some great starting points. I'm curious though, is it all about the end goal? Or is there something to be said for actually enjoying the journey itself?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's another major point in this source. Embracing the process. Motivation isn't just about the end result. It's about finding satisfaction in the steps you take to get there.
Okay, but let's be real. How do you find joy in the middle of something difficult? Like some tasks are just plain not fun.
True, not every step is going to feel like a party.
Yeah.
But this source suggests a little mental trick. Try switching from a have-to mindset to a get-to approach.
Okay.
So instead of thinking, oh, I have to study for this exam, try, I get to learn this new material and expand my knowledge.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a subtle shift, but I can see how it would make a big difference.
right.
It makes me think about all those times I was so focused on the finish line that I completely missed all the cool stuff happening along the way.
And speaking of growth, this source goes into the whole idea of a growth mindset, too. Oh, yeah, the growth mindset is huge. The source really emphasizes how seeing challenges as opportunities instead of roadblocks can really fuel your motivation.
Okay.
So that presentation that totally bombed, well, now it becomes a chance to improve your public speaking skills.
It's all about how you look at it, right?
Exactly.
It makes me wonder if that kind of mindset could actually help us deal with challenges better.
Totally. A growth mindset basically says, hey, failure isn't a sign that you're not good enough. It's just valuable feedback. It's all about learning and understanding that setbacks are just part of the process.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got a good grasp on the mindset piece, but eventually we got to put this stuff into action, right? When do the practical tips come in?
You bet. And this source has some really solid advice. It starts with something we all know, setting clear and achievable goals.
Sounds pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just making a wish list.
Oh, for sure. The source stresses the importance of SMART goals.
Smart goals.
Yeah. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's basically like creating a roadmap for success, not just a vague idea of where you want to go.
So instead of just saying, I want to write a book, it's more like, I will write a 50,000 word fantasy novel by the end of next year with smaller goals along the way.
You got it. And the source is all about breaking those big goals down into smaller, bite-sized pieces.
Right.
It makes the whole thing less scary and gives you those little wins that keep you going.
I can see how that kind of structure would appeal to our learners out there. They love to really dive in and see how each step builds towards something bigger.
Exactly.
What other practical tips really jumped out at you?
One that I thought was super interesting was the power of routine.
Okay.
The source says that often motivation comes after you start doing something.
Oh, I see.
So by creating routines, you're basically setting yourself up for success.
So instead of waiting for the motivation to hit, you just do it.
Yep.
Like sit down to write even when you don't feel like it, trusting that the words will come eventually.
Exactly. By doing things consistently, you build up this momentum that makes it easier to stick with it, even when you're not feeling super motivated.
It takes away all that pressure of waiting for inspiration to strike, which never seems to happen when you need it, right? This is making me rethink my whole approach.
It's a game changer.
What else does this source suggest?
Well, another cool tip is about your surroundings. Surrounding yourself with positivity.
Oh, I love that one. It's like your environment can totally make or break your mood, right?
Absolutely. The source talks about the people you hang out with, the spaces you're in, even the stuff you watch and read. Are they energizing you or dragging you down?
That's a good point. It's making me think twice about my social media feed. And maybe even my desk setup. Okay, what other tools are in this self-motivation toolkit?
This one might surprise you. Visualization.
Wait, like picturing yourself achieving your goals? Isn't that a little...
Out there? It might sound kind of woo-woo at first, but the source explains that mental rehearsal is actually a technique used by top athletes, performers, successful people in all sorts of fields.
Okay, so it's more than just daydreaming about success.
Yeah, it's about really vividly picturing yourself going through the steps to achieve your goal using all your senses.
So not just seeing it, you're feeling it, hearing it, almost like you're really there.
Exactly. And the source actually highlights research that shows that when you do this, it can activate similar brain regions as if you were actually doing the thing.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like giving your brain a preview of what success feels like.
Yeah, it's a way to prep your mind for the real deal.
I'm definitely intrigued to learn more about how that works. But first, what about rewards? Everyone loves a good reward. What does the source say about using those effectively?
It's all about celebrating those wins, no matter how big or small.
Yes.
It's like acknowledging your progress and giving yourself that positive feedback to keep you going.
Like those level up moments in a video game. It feels good to be recognized for your achievement.
Exactly. But the key is to find rewards that actually mean something to you.
Right. It's got to be personal.
It could be a small treat, a fun experience, or even just the satisfaction of checking something off your to-do list.
So it's not one size fits all. It's about figuring out what really motivates you. This is giving me so many ideas. What else does this source cover?
Well, it also tackles something we all experience at some point, motivation slumps.
Oh, tell me about it. Those days when even getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain.
I know, right? But the source is really good about saying that dips in motivation are completely normal. It's all about being kind to yourself during those times and remembering that progress isn't always a straight line.
So it's not about beating yourself up for not feeling motivated all the time.
Nope. It's more about understanding that motivation comes and goes. It's a journey, not a race.
That's a relief to hear. So how do we actually deal with those inevitable slumps and get back on track?
Well, the source offers a few simple but effective strategies that we can dive into
Okay.
after a quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be right back to explore those slump-busting tips and wrap up this awesome deep dive into self-motivation. Stay tuned. So before the break, we were talking about being kind to yourself when your motivation takes a dip and remembering that it's all part of the process. What are some actual strategies this source gives for getting unstuck?
The first one actually goes back to something we talked about earlier, your why.
Right, that deeper reason behind our goals.
Exactly. The source says that when you're feeling kind of blah about your goals, it can help to reconnect with your why. It's like reminding yourself why you even started this whole thing in the first place.
It's like looking at the bigger picture instead of getting lost in all the little details, right? What other strategies did you find helpful?
Well, the source also talks about the importance of taking breaks.
I am all about taking breaks. Sometimes stepping away from something for a bit lets you see things in a whole new way.
That's exactly it. The source is all about giving yourself permission to recharge, whether that's a quick walk, some music, anything you enjoy. You'll come back to the task feeling refreshed and ready to go.
It's like hitting the reset button on your brain. So revisiting your why and taking breaks are great, but what about those times when even starting feels impossible?
That's where the source suggests a simple but powerful trick: starting small.
You mentioned that earlier when we were talking about goal setting. It's about breaking those big tasks down into smaller, more manageable steps, right?
Exactly. But here, starting small is more about overcoming that initial low feeling. If you're not feeling motivated to tackle a big project, just tell yourself you'll do 5 minutes of focused work. Often, that little push is all you need to get going.
So it's like tricking your brain into getting started.
Kind of.
Once you get over that first hurdle, it's easier to keep going. It's like that idea from the source that action comes before motivation.
100%. By taking that first step, even if it's tiny, you're telling your brain that you're serious about this goal. And that can kickstart a whole chain of positive effects.
This is making me realize that we have a lot more power over our motivation than we think. It's not just this thing that happens to us. We can actually shape it through our actions and how we think. Speaking of how we think, the source goes deeper into that whole visualization thing and how it can boost motivation.
We touched on that a little earlier, but yeah, it's worth spending more time on it. The source presents visualization not as some mystical thing, but as a legit mental tool that's backed up by research.
Okay, I'll admit, I was a little skeptical at first. You mentioned studies showing that mental rehearsal can actually fire up the same parts of the brain as if you were physically doing the activity. Can you tell us more about that?
Of course, the source talks about studies that show when, let's say, athletes imagine themselves doing specific movements, the same neural pathways involved in actually doing those movements light up.
So it's like you're creating a mental map for success, training your brain to recognize and follow the steps to reach your goal.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that the more you practice visualizing yourself succeeding, the more confident and prepared you'll feel when it's time to do it for real.
That's starting to sound a lot less like magic and a lot more like a secret weapon. Are there any specific techniques for making visualization work really well?
The source suggests using all your senses when you visualize, as not just seeing yourself succeeding, but also feeling the emotions, hearing the sounds, even imagining the smells that go with it.
So you're not just thinking about it, you're fully experiencing it in your mind.
Exactly. It's about creating a full-on mental experience, not just a passing thought. I see you're getting this.
I am. So how exactly does visualization actually affect our motivation?
Well, the source explains that it works on a few different levels. First, it helps to solidify your goals, making them feel more real and tangible. Second, it primes your brain for success by building those neural pathways that support the actions you need to take. And finally, it can boost your confidence by letting you experience those positive feelings of success even before you've fully achieved it.
This is making me want to throw out my to-do list and start visualizing my accomplishments instead.
There you go.
It's like tapping into the power of my mind to make things happen.
That's the spirit.
And speaking of taking charge, the source also brings up the importance of positive self-talk. Now, I know people always say this is key to success, but I really struggle with it.
Yeah, it's not always easy.
Negative thoughts can be so stubborn, especially when things get rough.
The source says that becoming aware of your self-talk is the first step. Just notice those negative thoughts popping up and make a conscious choice to replace them with something more positive.
But how do you actually change those ingrained thought patterns? It feels like my brain is wired for negativity sometimes.
It definitely takes practice. The source suggests things like affirmations, gratitude journaling, surrounding yourself with positive people and messages. It's about intentionally feeding your mind positive stuff to combat that negativity bias.
So it's like creating a more supportive environment inside your own head, almost like tending a garden. You have to weed out those negative thoughts and nurture the positive ones.
I like that analogy. It highlights that this is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. Just like a garden needs constant care to thrive, your mindset also needs attention and nurturing.
This has given me a whole new way of thinking about self-motivation. It's not about forcing yourself to do stuff you hate. It's more about understanding how it all works and setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself the knowledge and tools to control your own drive and achieve your goals. And speaking of tools, the source revisits some of those practical strategies for boosting motivation, especially the idea of embracing the process.
We talked about that earlier, but I'm curious to dig a little deeper. How do we actually find joy and satisfaction in the middle of a touch process, especially when the finish line seems so far away?
The source suggests gifting your focus from the outcome to what you're doing right now. It's about finding those little moments of satisfaction along the way, celebrating those small wins that add up to something big.
So instead of just thinking about finishing that marathon, it's about enjoying how it feels to run, the people you're running with, and that sense of accomplishment after each training run.
You got it. It's about reframing how you see things to appreciate the journey, not just the destination. And this connects with that idea from the source about being grateful for the opportunity to learn and grow.
This makes me think about how often we get so caught up in the daily grind that we forget to just enjoy the process. It's like we're always chasing the next thing without pausing to savor the moment.
It's easy to fall into that crap, for sure. But the source reminds us that joy and fulfillment aren't just waiting for us at the end. They're in each step we take along the way.
This is a good reminder to slow down, be present, and appreciate the journey. It's not about pretending challenges don't exist. It's about finding those moments of joy and gratitude, even when things are tough.
Exactly. And this brings us back to those practical tips. The source reminds us about setting clear and achievable goals, especially using that SMART goals framework we talked about.
Right. SMART goals give us that roadmap to success, making sure our goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But sometimes, even with a map, it can be hard to stay on track. What does the source say about keeping up the momentum?
One of the big things it highlights is creating routines. We've talked about this a bit already, but it's worth repeating because it's so important for building consistent motivation.
It's about creating those positive habits that make taking action feel automatic, right? Like you're building a system that supports your goals instead of relying on willpower.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that action often leads to motivation. By establishing routines, you're basically training your brain to become more motivated simply by going through the motions, even if you don't feel like it at first.
So it's like you create these positive cycles where action leads to motivation, which leads to more action, and so on.
Precisely.
But building new routines can feel overwhelming. Where do you even start?
The source says to start small. Don't try to change your whole life overnight. Just focus on adding one or two small routines at a time.
Like starting with a consistent morning routine, or maybe setting aside a specific time each day for focused work.
Exactly. And the more you stick with those routines, the easier it gets. Over time, they'll become habits that support your goals without you having to constantly force yourself.
This is really showing me how much control we have over our own motivation. It's not something that just happens to us. We can actively create it through our actions, our thoughts, even our environment. Speaking of environment, the source talks about surrounding ourselves with positivity too.
Absolutely. The people we hang out with, the places we spend time, and even the things we watch and read all play a part in how motivated we feel.
So it's about being aware of what we're letting into our lives. Are these things energizing and supportive, or are they dragging us down?
Exactly. The source encourages us to surround ourselves with things that lift us up and inspire us. That might mean spending time with supportive people, seeking out positive content, or even creating a physical space that feels good to be in and makes us want to get things done.
This makes me think about who I follow on social media and the news I consume. It's not about ignoring negativity entirely, but being more intentional about what we expose ourselves to.
I think that's a key point. It's about finding a balance and realizing that we have a choice in what we focus on.
This has been so insightful. It's like we're uncovering all the different aspects of self-motivation and figuring out how to become the masters of our own drive.
We're just getting started. There's still so much more to explore in this amazing source.
I can't wait. But for now, we'll wrap up this part of our self-motivation journey. Stay tuned as we put together all these key takeaways and leave you with some final thoughts to ponder. And we're back. Ready to wrap up our deep dive into self-motivation with Unlocking Self-Motivation, an inner force. We've covered so much, but it feels like there's a common thread running through it all.
Definitely. One of the biggest takeaways for me is that self-motivation isn't something you're just born with. It's more like a skill you can build and get better at over time.
That's a game changer. It makes me feel like I'm actually in control. Like I don't have to wait around for motivation to just show up. I can figure out how it works, make it happen.
Exactly. And this source is packed with ways to do just that. We talked about understanding your why, setting smart goals, embracing the journey, even using visualization. It's like a whole toolbox for boosting motivation.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. Not just learning about motivation, but actually figuring out how to make it work for you, even when things get tough. So, as we're wrapping up, what are some key things you hope our listeners will take away from all this?
Well, first thing is that connection with your why. It's like knowing the deeper reason behind what you're doing. That's your anchor, your guiding star, especially when things get rough. It's what keeps you going when motivation dips.
I can see that. Having a strong why, really understanding why something matters can make all the difference. What else really stuck with you?
I think for us learners, embracing the process is huge. This source really showed how important it is to enjoy each step along the way. It's not just about the end result, right?
Right. It's about finding those moments of joy and satisfaction in the learning, the growing, the challenges, the wins, all of it.
Yeah. And don't forget about that growth mindset we talked about. This source was all about looking at challenges as chances to learn and grow. Setbacks aren't failures, they're just feedback, part of getting better.
It's all about shifting your perspective, being resilient, embracing the learning curve, understanding that making mistakes is just part of the process.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone. The source reminds us that our environment is super important. Being around positive people, uplifting messages, even having a physical space that motivates you, all these things can really boost your motivation level.
It's like creating this support system, this positive loop that keeps you moving forward, even when it's tough.
Absolutely. And one last thing, the source really emphasizes the importance of taking action. Don't wait for the perfect moment or that burst of inspiration. Just start, even with something small, and build from there.
It's like trusting that the motivation will come after you start, that by just taking that first step, you can set off a chain reaction of positive stuff.
You got it. And we've got all these strategies to help us do that. Setting smart goals, building routines, using visualization, even rewarding ourselves for progress.
We're walking away with a whole arsenal of tools for understanding and using our own motivation. But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Love it. What is it?
Knowing that self-motivation is something you can build, what's one small thing you can do this week to put all this into action? Maybe set a smart goal, start a new routine, reconnect with your why, or to give yourself permission to take a break when you need it.
Such a good question, and one that really encourages action. I'm really curious to see what our listeners choose to focus on.
Me too. And remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Start small, experiment, see what works best for you.
And be patient. Building self-motivation is a journey, not a sprint. There'll be ups and downs, moments of inspiration and moments of frustration. But by sticking with it, you'll get better and better at tapping into your own drive and achieving your goals.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of self-motivation.
It's been awesome diving deep with you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep unlocking that inner drive. We'll be here to help you along the way.